This presentation is brought to you by the SDG Decision Education Center.
Hello, and welcome to the Upside of Risk, brought to you by SDG Decision Education Center and Texas Executive Education at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm Lynn Slattery, Director at Texas Executive Education, where I manage a portfolio of open enrollment programs designed for busy professionals. This portfolio includes the Strategic Decision and Risk Management Certificate program, which brings together the academic research and practical application teaching of UT faculty and the 35 years of experience in strategy consulting and decision education of SDG, and serves as the basis for our webinar series. We are proud to be partnering with SDG on this series. Today, I'm excited to have two experts in the field of risk, and they're going to share a lot of their knowledge with us. We have Hannah Winter and Carl Spetzler ready to share their vast array of experience and knowledge with you. Hannah is a partner and managing director at Strategic Decision Groups, where she leads the firm's executive education practice, developing and teaching courses designed to build individual capability in decision-making and risk management. Carl is the CEO of Strategic Decision Groups. He has put in a number of years in this area. For over 40 of those, he has been helping top business leaders create innovative strategies and deal with complexities of risk over the long time horizons. Hannah, I will turn the floor over to you to begin.
Thank you, Lynn. So let's get started by talking about risks and opportunities. What is a risk anyway, and when is a risk an opportunity? So I'm going to offer you this risky opportunity with this certificate. The certificate is free. Your success is contingent on calling the flip of a coin correctly. We'll flip the coin, and if you call it correctly, you'll win $2,000. And if you call it incorrectly, you won't win anything, and the certificate becomes worthless. Note that there's not going to be any tricks here. We're going to use a fair, verified, two-sided coin. So think about this. Do you want this certificate? Is it worth anything? So let's go ahead and take a few polls here. First poll, is the certificate worth something? Yes or no? You've got a 50-50 chance of winning $2,000, and if you call the coin incorrectly, you just won't win anything. So is it worth something to you? Please go ahead and enter your response here, and let's take a look. Great, looks like many of you have responded, so let's close the poll and take a look at the results. Looks like most of you think that the instrument is worth something. There's a few of you who think it might not be worth anything. And I agree with you, it's worth something, right? We're not sure exactly how much it's worth, but it's worth something. So now let's do another poll. I'm willing to give this certificate to you for free, but do you have a risk in accepting this offer? So two possible responses. Yes, I have a risk because I don't get a sure win, or no, this is a risk-free opportunity. You're not sure you're going to win. Do you have a risk, or is there just no risk at all? So go ahead and answer. This one's a little bit harder. You're taking a little bit longer to respond here. So that's interesting. There's a big confusion, which we're going to talk about in a little bit about the difference between the word risk and the word opportunity, and the difference between downside and upside. So looks like most of you have responded, so let's go ahead and take a look at your poll responses. So 3/4 of you say no, this is a risk-free opportunity, but some of you say yes, there is a risk because I don't get a sure win. So there's a lot of confusion here or disagreement about what we mean by risk. Are we including the upside or just looking at the downside, or whether it's an opportunity? Let's take another poll. Assuming that you've accepted the offer and now you own the certificate, do you now have a risk? So you've accepted the offer, you have the certificate, you own it. I gave it to you for free. Do you now have a risk? So go ahead and answer yes, you have a risk, or no, you don't have a risk now that you own the certificate and you have the opportunity to call the coin. So go ahead and respond. Again, it's taking you a little bit longer to respond to this one. Is it worth something? Is it not worth something? Is there a risk? Is there no risk? Looks like most of you have responded, so let's go ahead and close the poll and look at the results. Wow, about half of you agree that you have a risk, and half of you think you don't. So yes, the certificate is worth something. Your net worth has just gone up, right? Although we haven't flipped the coin and you haven't called it. And now that you have this, your net worth has gone up and you might not win anything. And that's where people start thinking there's a risk, because their mindset has shifted from before they own the certificate, when their net worth was not quite as high, to a time when they did own the certificate and their net worth has gone up. So let's do one more poll. When did the opportunity change into a risk? When did it switch from being a risk-free opportunity to being a risky asset? First, when you accepted the offer, when you realized that you're now the owner of this asset, or when you told your spouse. It's a little bit of a joke, but sometimes people think that the idea of risk changes when they tell someone else about it. So go ahead and respond. When did the opportunity change into a risk? When you accepted the offer, or when you realized that you're now the owner of the asset? Great. Many of you are responding. There's a big split here. Let me show you the results now. So we're about split between, yes, the opportunity changed into a risk when I accepted the offer, or when I realized that I now own the asset. And many of you might think both of those are the same. You've accepted it and you realize you're the owner of the asset, and some of you said, I told my spouse or my partner. So this is at the heart of the controversy between the traditional definition of risk and the ISO 31000 definition, which we'll talk about in a moment. For most people, getting something for free that has only upside is not considered a risk. But as soon as you own something, you change your mindset and think to yourself, now I'm actually worth a little bit more. And if there is a chance of losing value, you see a risk. For example, if an oil and gas company puts on their books that they have an exploration asset and they have a 50-50 chance of getting reserves, then all of a sudden not getting the reserves is a risk. It's really a mindset shift, when you shift from one mindset to another. So now let's talk about different definitions of risk. There's a traditional COSO point of view, which says that events with a negative impact represent risks. So take a look at this definition. Events can have negative impact, positive impact, or both, but events with a negative impact represent risks. So clearly, COSO here is defining risk as just downside, and that's a very traditional, well understood, well accepted definition of risk. But one of the key paradigm shifts proposed in ISO 31000 is a change in how the word risk is defined. Rather than defining it as a chance or probability of a loss, they defined it as the effect of uncertainty on objectives, thus causing the word risk to refer to positive consequences of uncertainty or upside in addition to negative ones. This added to the confusion because we could have kept the two words separate, risk meaning downside and uncertainty meaning both upside and downside. So there's a lot of confusion even in the definition of these official organizations that are defining the word risk. What does it really mean? So now let's do one more poll before I turn it over to Carl. How do you think the word risk should be defined? And there's no right answer here. I'm just interested to find out your thoughts, and then Carl and I will comment on them. So the first option is the traditional meaning, a chance of a significant loss. Second definition, I want to include the upside, this agreeing with the ISO 31000 definition of the effects of uncertainty on objectives, or you're not sure, can't decide yet, it's really a confusing topic. So go ahead and enter your responses. Looks like most of you have responded, so let's go ahead and close the polls and show you the results. So wow, an overwhelming majority of you think that we should include the upside, and we kind of teased that out of you with the title of our webinar anyway, the idea of upside of risk, that it includes the effects of uncertainty on objectives. But some of you want to stick with the traditional meaning, and we believe maybe it makes more sense for you to stick with the traditional meaning and then use the word uncertainty when you want to include upside. Otherwise, it just creates lots of confusion in your organization. And then, of course, maybe those of you who are at the I am not sure will have a clearer answer to this as we conclude the webinar. So now let me turn it over to Carl so he can talk more about this and how you should think about risk in your organization.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, first of all, the word risk is a four-letter word, and it has mostly negative connotation in the common understanding, and it creates confusion, as we saw from Hannah's demonstration. In fact, let me comment on one of the polls that kind of surprised me, that when people recognized they now have the certificate, and she asked, now do you have risk? Well, if you have something that you have recognized and at least announced, so if you're a corporation and you have a big opportunity, before you act on it and tell the world about it, it isn't added to your net worth. But if you have a 50% chance of finding oil in a big oil field, your value of that company goes up. And once that is announced, and it's certainly counted by the rest of the world as one of the uncertain opportunities in your portfolio, you do have the risk of not getting it. But it's that change of, do we own it or not own it? And the fundamental question here is the recognition of both the upside and downside are completely interconnected, and I think that's also why most of you felt like we should include the whole subject of uncertainty under the topic of risk. And so let me just go through. In the common understanding, it really means taking a chance of a significant loss. Risk management is generally seen as loss avoidance and not value creation. But in fact, you know, if you had a car with very poor brakes, you wouldn't be driving very fast. So the ability to perform, there's a lot of value creation in the ability to have good value protection and being able to enhance that. So it's more a common perception that I think we're finding here. Most of us don't like to consider risk unless we have to. And we have to avoid blame or liability, legal liabilities, those kinds of things, because we're forced by some compliance requirements. It goes all the way to boards these days. You know, you take on a lot of risk as a board member if you do not follow what it is appropriate to have due care for the shareholder interests. It's often linked to pessimism. Humans are naturally risk averse. In many situations, there are a few that are risk seeking by nature, but I think the Darwin Award has gone to many of those. And facing risks or taking risks is often seen as a matter of courage rather than a matter of a quality decision where you do smart risk taking. A lot of the opportunity we get and value we create comes with risk attached or uncertainty attached. And so trying to redefine risk, though, as including the upside is completely confusing. Because when you go to boards of directors or the C-level or risk management in organizations, they expect the risk management function and the risk manager, the chief risk officer, that whoever has those responsibilities, to be protecting them from the downside. They expect them to hold the top 10 biggest risk exposures and do whatever needs to be done to lower the probability and prepare for mitigation, therefore lowering the consequences and doing all kinds of things to be able to improve it. And they do not look to the risk management function for managing the upside. You know, I once asked a CRO that was talking in a panel about, yes, we need to be able to manage uncertainty and the full upside and downside as risk managers. And I said, you're a CRO, does your CEO look to you for having the top 20 opportunities that are low probability, big opportunities upside for your opportunity portfolio? He says, of course not. Well, do you have the top 20? Yes. So it doesn't mean that that person couldn't look to the upside, but they can't do it at the same time. It's completely different directions that we have to look to be able to deal with both of those requirements, let's say. So we prefer to use the term uncertainty and don't call it uncertainty unless it includes the upside. It's the complete range of probability of what could happen. So, and we do that rather than risk, because I think when we try to redefine it, we end up causing even more confusion on something that's already a difficult subject. So philosophically, we're aligned with the ISO definition that says we need to consider in risk management the full range of uncertainty. And in terms of redefining the terms, we're not aligned with them. So when risk is defined as including the upside, okay, so let's say we now use that word where we prefer to call uncertainty, then all decision making under uncertainty is included. And that really is all decision making. So it's not just the traditional area where risk management has played a big role in foreign exchange risk management, insurance risk management, the whole capital structure of how close are you to having a strong capital structure that allows you to withstand significant risk because of your debt equity ratio, or treasury risk management, or financial risk management. It now, as soon as you include uncertainty, it includes the growth strategy and opportunity management, acquisitions, product development, R&D investments. All of those things carry with them a lot of uncertainty. In fact, opportunities may grow out of the risk management function. One specific example that comes to mind is we had a major chemical company that required a core feedstock, and that feedstock was somewhat processed already, so it wasn't always available to the level they wanted, and the risk management was how do we get, the question was how do we get secure supply? And after they really studied it, they came to the conclusion that what we really should do is invest hundreds of millions of dollars in a chemical plant that would allow us to make more than we use, in which case we'd sell some, but we'd greatly enhance the security of our supply chain. Well, as soon as it became a major capital project, it really was now on the upside part, and it looked like a very good return, even though the idea originated as a risk management idea and risk mitigation idea. So where the uncertain decision project comes from doesn't matter so much. Once you identify that, you do have to address the full range of uncertainty. And as you take that perspective, you'll deal with all the risks, the operational risks and safety policies, all. In fact, as you build it up, you get to what we call the whole shebang. You have to be able to deal with the whole shebang. Well, that makes decision-making for the purposes of risk management the fundamental risk decision-making under uncertainty, which is a field that has grown over the last 50 years into a very fundamental professional field. It's what we address in this SDRM program, where people can gain certificates in it. It's so broad that it covers all aspects of business, and it is a core competency and should be a core competency of risk management functions. It turns out that very only a select few risk management professionals have deep understanding of that field, and it's still new to that function, as there is a convergence between thinking about protecting from the downside and taking advantage of the upside of uncertainty. That is the complete subject of managing uncertainty with upside and downside. So we believe that's the right way to think about uncertainty, but it also introduces some additional issues. And these issues are pretty fundamental. At the top management level and at the board level, when they talk about risk, they don't include the upside, and they want protection from risk exposure. They want straight up protection from risk exposure. And if they don't get it, under the pressure of Sarbanes-Oxley and under the pressures of the always increased scrutiny on directors and directors' roles, they would feel very exposed. So they want to have a very effective enterprise risk management function that goes all the way to the board. A second issue is that much of the competency for decision-making under uncertainty isn't usually resident in the risk staff functions. So the risk management community and the risk professionals don't have that deep understanding of decision-making under uncertainty, which includes the study of decision analysis and probabilistic methods and addressing assessment techniques of how you can measure the subjective probability going forward and all kinds of things of that sort that go on in that field. And finally, it introduces a confusion of roles and responsibilities, because when people don't really understand decision-making under uncertainty with the full upside and downside, which I interpret the earlier poll as that's what the majority of this audience already is there. You want that, okay? But when you want that, and we talk about risk in one way and then opportunity in another, there's a confusion of roles and responsibilities, and there's no common understanding and language. And what we really need is clarity about those roles and a common understanding of that language. So let me give you what we recommend you do. First of all, for the top management and boards to include the upside when they want protection from risk exposure, that is dealing with the full uncertainty, I would recommend using the traditional meaning of risk and opportunity, and you use uncertainty when you include upside and have the whole shebang. And you do need a full understanding all the way to the board of how we manage uncertainty in the whole shebang. So that's my recommendation.
All right, Carl, let's see what the audience thinks of your recommendation. So let's take a poll at this point. So Carl says that for this first issue that top management and boards don't include the upside, he's recommending that we use the traditional meaning of risk, use uncertainty only when we're including the upside, and try to really understand the whole shebang. So go ahead and let us know how, what's your level of agreement with Carl's recommendation? Do you strongly disagree with him? Do you strongly agree with him? Or something in between? So go ahead and submit your vote for this particular issue, and we will ask you for the other ones as well as we get to them. So it looks like most of you have voted. Let's go ahead and close the polls and show the responses here. So it looks like, yeah.
I interpret that as being in agreement, at least on a significant majority. It's like, what, about 70% when you add up the two groups that agree and strongly agree? I can't seem to. And now, when we go to the next issue, thank you. So on the next issue, there's confusion of roles and responsibilities. Let me tell you what I'd like to do with that. So on that confusion of roles and responsibilities and lack of common understanding, we want to differentiate among three kinds of roles. There's the line management in an organization that fundamentally has the responsibility for producing results, and they are focused on so much activity and functional management and project management that looking forward over the next quarter and the following quarter, that's a huge job. And with that job, they're always going to have limited attention on the tails of the distribution, that is on the high upside and low downside, okay? So the low probability, high consequence events will never get enough attention. Therefore, you have to have an upside leader, somebody that protects that we really go after the lower probability, big opportunities like in R&D or new business model extensions and things where you're testing things out and you have a lower chance but big payoff. And you have to have a downside protector that says, you know, the bad things can happen. Let's understand what are the really significant risk exposures and protect from that side. All three of those functions are needed. If they don't get sufficient attention, you will get exposure to bigger risks and you will not capture the upside opportunities. And along with that, all of those people have to have a basic understanding of decision making under uncertainty. Not a huge amount, but they have to be able to think in terms of possibility, probability, separate for decisions from outcomes, and the fundamentals. That, I think we're ready to test the poll.
Yeah, let's do another poll. So on this second issue about the confusion about roles and responsibilities and lack of common understanding in language, what do you think of Carl's recommendation that you need to really differentiate among these three types of roles and understand this whole field of decision making under uncertainty? So go ahead and let us know about what you think about Carl's recommendations. Looks like most of you have submitted your votes, so let's go ahead and close the polls and take a look at the results. And Carl, it looks like now we have, 77% of the audience agreeing with you.
Okay, good. Well, let's see on the last one. So much of that competency for decision-making on uncertainty isn't resident in the risk staff. So I think we have to realize that the decisions under uncertainty can arise from anywhere, and upside and downside are not separated, and the decision math doesn't care where the idea came from. It might be primarily a risk protection, it might be primarily capturing an opportunity. They all connect. And so we have to build that understanding, and we have to build the competency for being able to do the work of a decision professional with decision quality and decision analytics somewhere in the organization, whether that's in the finance organization, if you have a strategic finance group, or it reports into the risk manager, or it's in the strategy upside side, or in the risk manager downside. It doesn't matter so much as long as that competency is neutral and very capable.
All right, Carl, here's a question from the audience. Can a risk management organization reporting into a chief risk officer be successful in managing the upside of risk?
Oh, that's a really good question here. First of all, if you want to consider the upside of risk, as I discussed previously, and the whole of uncertainty, you need a strong decision analysis group, or these days as what we call a decision quality program office, or a center of competency that gets to critical mass in being able to address those kinds of decision problems. It's less a question of where they report in, but they have to be neutral. They have to be seen as helpful to the decision makers, not as either, if they're in the finance function, a part of the control function, the checkers as opposed to the helpers, or if they're serving in the risk function, they again have to be, think of them as white hats that are on the side of helping decision makers really understand uncertainty and the consequences of their choices and make it better. I've seen a couple of organizations where the chief risk officer is also the chief strategy officer because they're not very big. And the CEO doesn't have enough people and says, I want you to do both. and wear both hats, those are very different hats to wear, as we pointed out earlier, but that can be done. In that case, I think it fits right into that portfolio of responsibilities for that person. But what I find is the checker role, the strong control role, which is needed in organizations, often gets confused with the evaluation role of uncertainty and dealing with decision making under uncertainty, and that you don't want to have.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Hannah and Carl, for bringing us your expert insights on this risk and showing us that there is an upside. That's always very interesting to find out that we have those opportunities. So thank you very much for being with us today, sharing with us your time and energy, and we hope to see you again soon for our next webinar. Take care.